On June 23, 1912, in a quiet nursing home in Paddington, London, a boy was born into a world that valued conformity, but his mind was built for revolution. His name was Alan Matheson Turing. To his parents, he was a quiet, dreamy child. To his teachers, he was a puzzle brilliant in mathematics, indifferent to Latin, and prone to writing with his left hand in a right-handed world. But to himself, he was something else entirely, a machine that could think. His father, Julius Turing, was a civil servant in the Indian Civil Service. His mother, Ethel, was a devout woman who believed in discipline, duty, and the virtues of the British Empire. They sent Alan to Sherborne School, a strict boarding school where boys were molded into officers and gentlemen. But Alan didn't fit. He arrived late on his first day. His bicycle had broken down and walked 60 miles from Southampton to Dorset in the rain to get there. The headmaster called it eccentric. Alan called it efficient. At Sherborne, he found his first true connection, not with people, but with ideas. He devoured books on Einstein, Eddington, and quantum theory. He wrote letters to scientific journals. And at 16, he had a revelation. Intelligence could be mechanized. If a human could follow a set of rules to solve a problem, why couldn't a machine do the same? But school was not kind to those who were different. He was teased for his stutter, his untidy hair, his habit of staring into space. His only real friend was Christopher Morcom, a fellow student with a sharp mind and gentle spirit. For the first time, Alan felt seen. They talked of stars, mathematics, and the possibility of life after death. Christopher believed the soul was a pattern that could persist beyond the body. Alan, ever the logician, was skeptical, but he wanted to believe. Then, in February 1930, tragedy struck. Christopher fell ill with bovine tuberculosis contracted from infected milk and died suddenly at age 18. Alan was devastated. In his grief, he wrote to Christopher's mother, "I feel that if only he had been older, he could have given us a theory of the universe. But in that loss, something hardened in him. If the soul was a pattern, perhaps it could be reconstructed. If thought was a process, perhaps it could be replicated." He threw himself into mathematics with new intensity. He won a scholarship to King's College, Cambridge, where he studied under G.H. Hardy, one of the greatest mathematicians of the age. There he thrived. He published his first paper at 22. He became a fellow at 24. And in 1936, he solved a problem that had haunted logicians for decades. The Entscheidungsproblem, the decision problem. David Hilbert had asked, "Is there a mechanical process that can determine whether any mathematical statement is true or false?" Turing's answer was revolutionary. He imagined a theoretical machine, a universal computing machine, that could simulate any algorithmic process. It had an infinite tape, a read-write head, and a set of rules. If such a machine couldn't solve a problem, no machine could. This became the Turing machine, the foundation of all modern computing. But even more importantly, Turing proved that some problems are undecidable. There are limits to what even a perfect machine can know. In that moment, he didn't just invent computer science. He redefined the boundaries of human knowledge. Yet for all his brilliance, on September 4, 1939, one day after Britain declared war on Germany, a quiet 27-year-old mathematician arrived at a sprawling Victorian estate in the English countryside. The house, surrounded by manicured gardens and oak trees, looked like a country retreat for the aristocracy. But behind its red brick facade, a different kind of war was being waged. This was Bletchley Park, Britain's top-secret code-breaking center, and Alan Turing had just walked into the most important job of his life. The stakes could not have been higher. The German military was using the Enigma machine to encrypt all its communications. It was a device of elegant complexity, 3 rotors that scrambled letters with 159 quintillion possible settings. Every night, the Germans changed the key. By morning, the machine was unbreakable again. The British Navy was losing ships by the dozen. Convoys vanished, cities starved. Without intelligence, the Allies were blind. Turing was assigned to Hut 8, tasked with breaking naval Enigma, the most secure version, used by U-boats that were strangling Britain's supply lines. Unlike his colleagues, who relied on linguistic patterns and captured codebooks, Turing saw Enigma not as a cipher, but as a mathematical system. "It's not about language," he told his team. "It's about logic. And logic can be mechanized." He began designing a machine to do what no human could: test thousands of rotor settings per hour. He called it the bomb, named after an earlier Polish device, but vastly more powerful. It was an electromechanical behemoth, 6 feet tall, covered in spinning drums and clicking relays. Each drum represented a possible Enigma rotor. When the machine found a setting that produced readable German, it would stop and light up. But building it was only half the battle. To make the bomb work, Turing needed a crib, a guessed piece of plaintext that matched a ciphertext. He realized that German messages often began with predictable phrases like Heil Hitler, or weather reports like Keine Besonderen, Ergebnis, nothing to report. These patterns became the keys to unlock the machine. The work was grueling. Days turned into nights. The huts were cold, damp, and filled with the constant clatter of typewriters and machines. Secrecy was absolute. Workers weren't allowed to discuss their work, even with each other. Turing, already socially awkward, became more isolated. He rode his bicycle to work with a gas mask strapped to the handlebars to combat his chronic hay fever. He chained his mug to the radiator so no one would steal it. He rarely spoke, except to machines. But his mind never stopped. In 1940, he wrote a secret paper titled The Applications of Probability to Cryptography, in which he introduced Bayesian statistics to code-breaking using probability to narrow down likely keys. It was decades ahead of its time. The paper was classified until 2012. Then came the breakthrough. In early 1941, a German U-boat transmitted a message with a critical error. It repeated the same message key twice. Turing and his team seized on it. Using the bomb, they cracked the settings. For the first time, they could read real-time naval Enigma traffic. They learned the positions of U-boat wolf packs. They rerouted convoys. Ship losses plummeted. But the victory was fragile. In February 1942, the Germans added a fourth rotor to naval Enigma. Overnight, Bletchley was blind again. For nearly a year, the Atlantic turned into a graveyard. Turing worked obsessively, surviving on apples and tea, sleeping under his desk. He redesigned the bomb. He developed new crib techniques. He even sailed on a minesweeper to study German naval procedures firsthand. Finally, in December 1942, they broke it again, thanks to a captured U-boat codebook and Turing's relentless logic. This time, the intelligence flow never stopped. Turing never sought glory. He didn't attend victory parties. He didn't write memoirs. He simply returned to his work, knowing that every decrypted message meant lives saved. Historians estimate that Bletchley's work shortened the war by 2 to 4 years and saved over 14 million lives. Yet when the war ended in 1945, Turing received no medal, no public thanks. The work remained classified. He had helped win the war, but the peace would not be kind to him. Because in a world that rewarded conformity, a man who loved other men was not a hero. He was a criminal, and the very country he saved would soon turn on him. In the winter of 1941, as snow blanketed the English countryside, a machine in Hut 8 at Bletchley Park began to sing. It wasn't music. It was the sound of victory. Click, whir, clack. The bomb, Alan Turing's electromechanical marvel, was alive. Each of its 36 drums spun in precise synchronization, testing thousands of Enigma rotor combinations per minute. When it found a match, it would stop and light up like a beacon in the dark. This was not just engineering. It was warfare by logic. The German Navy's U-boats had turned the Atlantic into a killing field. Convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons from America were being hunted like prey. In March 1941 alone, 27 ships were sunk. Britain was starving. Without supplies, the island would fall not to bombs, but to silence. Turing knew the key wasn't brute force. It was elegance. The Enigma machine, for all its complexity, had a flaw. A letter could never be encrypted as itself. If the plaintext said weather, and the ciphertext had no W in the first position, that setting could be eliminated instantly. Turing turned this weakness into a weapon. He designed the bomb to exploit these logical contradictions, using a crib-a-guessed phrase like kein Besonderen, nothing special. The machine would simulate the Enigma's wiring and eliminate impossible rotor settings. It didn't solve Enigma. It narrowed the universe of possibilities until only one remained. The first major success came on May 9, 1941, when Turing's team decrypted a message from U-110. It contained the current naval Enigma settings and a complete codebook. British sailors captured the sub just hours later, retrieving the documents before it sank. The intelligence was so valuable, Prime Minister Winston Churchill ordered the capture kept secret, even from most of his own cabinet. For months, Bletchley had eyes on the wolf packs. Convoys were rerouted. U-boats were ambushed. Ship losses dropped by 60%. But then, in February 1942, the Germans changed the game. They introduced a fourth rotor in naval Enigma dubbed Shark by the British. Overnight, the Atlantic went dark again. The number of sinkings soared. In November 1942, 119 ships were lost, the worst month of the war. Turing did not panic. He retreated into his mind. He redesigned the bomb, adding more drums and parallel processing units. He developed new crib techniques, using weather reports, routine call signs, and even German punctuality, like the fact that messages were always sent at the same time each day. He worked 20-hour shifts, surviving on apples, tea, and cigarettes. He slept under his desk, wrapped in a blanket, dreaming in equations. The breakthrough came not from technology alone, but from human error. On October 30th, 1942, a German U-boat transmitted a message with a critical mistake. It used the same key for two different messages. Turing's team pounced. Using the duplicate, they isolated the fourth rotor's settings. By December 1942, they were reading Shark traffic again. This time, the intelligence flow never stopped. The impact was immediate. In March 1943, convoys were rerouted around U-boat patrols. In May, the Allies destroyed 41 U-boats in 1 month, so many that Admiral Karl Dönitz was forced to withdraw his fleet from the North Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not with guns, but with logic, patience, and a machine that thought like a man. Turing never celebrated. He didn't attend debriefings. He didn't seek promotion. He simply returned to his desk, chain-smoking, scribbling new ideas in his notebook. He began sketching designs for a Universal Computer 1 that could store programs in memory, not just follow fixed instructions. He called it the ACE, the Automatic Computing Engine. It was visionary, but few understood. To the world, he was just a quiet man in a hut, riding a bicycle with a gas mask. But in the silence of Bletchley Park, he was the voice that warned the fleet, the mind that outhought the Reich, the unsung architect of victory. And yet, as the guns fell silent, a new kind of war was beginning, one he could not break with logic. Because this enemy wore a judge's robe, and its weapon was the law. By the spring of 1943, the tide of war had turned not with a bang, but with a whisper. In the corridors of Whitehall, in the war rooms of Washington, and on the decks of Allied ships, a new kind of intelligence flowed. Ultra, the code name for all decrypted German communications from Bletchley Park. And at its heart was Alan Turing. The breaking of naval Enigma's Shark cipher in late 1942 had done more than save convoys. It had given the Allies eyes inside the mind of the German military. For the first time, commanders knew where U-boats were patrolling, where supply lines were thin, and when the Luftwaffe was shifting its focus. But the true test of Ultra's power would come not in the Atlantic, but on the beaches of Normandy. Planning for D-Day, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, began in secret in 1943. The Allies needed to land over 150,000 troops on a narrow stretch of French coast. But Hitler's Atlantic Wall was heavily fortified, and German reserves could rush to the front within hours. Success depended on deception and perfect timing. Turing's intelligence was critical. Ultra revealed that Hitler believed the main invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The Allies amplified this illusion with fake radio traffic, inflatable tanks, and a fictional army led by General Patton. But to make the deception work, they needed to know if the Germans were falling for it. They did thanks to Enigma. On June 5, 1944, as storm clouds gathered over the English Channel, a decoded message confirmed it. German units in Normandy were on low alert. The path was clear. General Eisenhower gave the order. "Okay, we'll go." On June 6th, D-Day began. Over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 156,000 troops stormed the beaches. And behind every decision, the timing, the location, the feints, was the silent work of Bletchley Park. Historians later estimated that ultra-intelligence shortened the war in Europe by 2 to 4 years, and saved over 14 million lives. Yet no one knew. The secrecy was so absolute that even Eisenhower later said, "The intelligence that helped us win the war was the greatest secret of the century." Turing received no medal, no public recognition, not even a thank you note. He returned to his work as if nothing had changed. In 1944, he moved to Hounslow Park, a secret signals research station, where he began designing a new machine, not for war, but for peace. He called it the Delilah, a portable, secure voice encryption device. It was brilliant, but it came too late for the war. Still, it proved his mind was already racing toward the future, a world connected by secure, intelligent machines. By 1945, the war in Europe was over. Japan surrendered in August. Bletchley Park was shut down. Documents were burned. Machines were dismantled. Staff were sworn to silence for 30 years. Turing, now 33, was awarded the Order of the British Empire, OBE, a modest honor, given in private, with no explanation of why he deserved it. He could have retired. He could have written memoirs, but he chose a different path. He accepted a position at the National Physical Laboratory, NPL, in London, where he proposed a revolutionary idea, a stored program electronic computer. He called it the Automatic Computing Engine, ACE. Unlike the bomb, which solved one problem, the ACE could be reprogrammed to solve any problem: math, code breaking, even simulating thought. His 1945 report, Proposed Electronic Calculator, was visionary. It described memory, processing units, and input-output devices concepts that would define computing for decades. But bureaucracy moved slowly. Colleagues dismissed his ideas as too theoretical. Funding was delayed. Frustrated, Turing left the NPL in 1947. He moved to the University of Manchester, where he helped develop the Manchester Mark I, one of the world's first true computers. There, in 1950, he published his most famous paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In it, he asked a question that would echo through the ages. Can machines think? He proposed a test now called the Turing test, where a human judge converses with a machine and a person. If the judge can't tell which is which, the machine is thinking. The world wasn't ready. Critics called it philosophy, not science. But Turing didn't care. He saw the future, a world where machines could learn, create, and even dream. He had helped win the war. He had founded a new science. But he had not won the right to live as himself. Because in 1952, the same country he saved would arrest him for the crime of loving another man. And the silence that followed would last longer than any war. In January 1952, Alan Turing reported a burglary at his home in Wilmslow, Cheshire. He had been robbed of a small sum of money and a few personal items. But when police questioned him, they uncovered something far more dangerous. Alan had been in a relationship with Arnold Murray, a 19-year-old unemployed man. In Britain, at the time, homosexual acts between men were a criminal offense under the 1885 Criminal Law Amendment Act, punishable by up to 2 years in prison with hard labor. Turing did not deny it. He never hid who he was. In his police statement, he wrote calmly, "I have had sexual relations with Murray on a number of occasions." He saw no shame in it. To him, love was a human fact, not a moral failing. But the law saw it differently. The case went to trial on March 31, 1952. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, filled with the scent of old paper and nervous sweat. Turing sat quietly, hands folded, wearing a dark suit and his familiar slightly rumpled tie. His lawyer argued for leniency. This was a man who had saved millions of lives, a national hero, a scientific pioneer. But the judge, Sir John Eustace Figgins, showed no mercy. "You are a man of great ability," the judge said, "but you have committed a grave offense against the moral order of this country." Turing was given a choice: 2 years in prison, or probation with hormonal treatment. The latter was a new form of therapy called chemical castration, a series of injections of synthetic estrogen, stilbostrol, meant to suppress libido and cure homosexuality. It was experimental, humiliating, and devastating to the body. Turing chose the injections, not out of shame, but because prison would end his work. What followed was a slow unraveling. The injections began in May 1952. Within weeks, his body betrayed him. He developed gynecomastia-enlarged breasts. He suffered from impotence, fatigue, and mood swings. His once sharp mind grew foggy. He wrote to a friend, "I am suffering from the side effects of the treatment, but I suppose it could be worse." He was also subjected to constant police surveillance. Officers visited his home weekly. He had to report any change of address. He was barred from working on government projects, cut off from the world of cryptography and computing he had helped create. Yet he kept working. He published papers on morphogenesis, how patterns form in nature, like stripes on a zebra or spots on a leopard. He built a chemical model showing how simple molecules could self-organize into complex shapes. It was groundbreaking biology decades ahead of its time. But the isolation was crushing. Friends drifted away, afraid of association. Colleagues avoided him. He was no longer the quiet genius of Bletchley Park. He was a convicted criminal. In letters, he expressed a quiet despair. "I am not unhappy," he wrote, "but I feel that I have lost the right to exist as I am." He began seeing a psychiatrist, not because he believed he was ill, but because he wanted to understand how society could so thoroughly reject a person for loving truth and another man. He also explored new ideas. In 1953, he built a primitive chess-playing program, one of the first in history. He corresponded with scientists about artificial life. He even attended a lecture by Ludwig Wittgenstein on the philosophy of mind. But the world was closing in. The final blow came in 1953, when the British government revoked his security clearance. He could no longer access classified research. He was cut off from the very institutions he had saved. The man who had broken Enigma, the man who had helped win the war, was now deemed untrustworthy. And all because he loved the wrong way. There was no parade for him, no statue, no apology. Just a lonely house in the countryside, a ticking clock, and a body poisoned by the state he served. Yet even in this darkness, his mind reached for light. Because Turing never stopped believing that patterns could be found in chaos, that logic could prevail over fear, and that one day the world might understand that love is not a crime. It is the most human algorithm of all. But time was running out, and in the silence of his final months, a decision was forming, not of surrender, but of final, tragic clarity. On the morning of June 8, 1954, Alan Turing's housekeeper arrived at his home in Wilmslow, Cheshire, as usual. She found the front door unlocked, a rare lapse for the meticulous mathematician. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. In the spare bedroom, she discovered him lying on his bed, fully dressed, lifeless. On the bedside table sat an eaten apple, its flesh turning brown in the pale English light. An autopsy confirmed the cause of death: cyanide poisoning. The level in his blood was lethal. The inquest, held 3 days later, concluded suicide. The coroner noted that Turing had been undergoing hormonal treatment, that he suffered from depression, and that a jar of potassium cyanide used in his home electroplating experiments was found in his room. The half-eaten apple was never tested, but it became the enduring symbol of his end. To the world, it was a tragic but simple story. A brilliant man broken by scandal, choosing silence over suffering. But those who knew him wondered. Turing was not prone to despair. Just weeks before, he had booked tickets to see a play. He had been working on a new theory of quantum biology. He had told a friend, "I think I've solved the problem of how cells know where to grow." He had plans. Yet the evidence pointed to self-administration. Cyanide can be absorbed through the skin or ingested. The apple was the most likely vehicle, familiar, ordinary, and final. Some speculate he chose it as a quiet homage to his favorite fairy tale, Snow White, where a poisoned apple brings sleep that looks like death. Others see it as a scientist's last experiment, a controlled, painless exit. But the deeper truth may be simpler. Alan Turing was tired of hiding, tired of being treated as a criminal for loving as he did, tired of a world that used his mind but rejected his heart. His death was not widely reported. The Times of London ran a short obituary mentioning his work on logical computing machines, but not his war heroism. Bletchley Park remained secret. The government issued no statement. He was buried in secrecy, just as he had lived in secrecy. For decades, his name faded. Textbooks credited others with inventing the computer. The bomb was forgotten. The Turing test was discussed in philosophy classes, but rarely tied to the man who proposed it. He became a ghost in the machine of history. But the apple did not rot in silence. In the 1970s, as the gay rights movement grew, activists began asking, who was Alan Turing? In 1983, ABC dramatization Breaking the Code brought his story to a new generation. In 2009, after a public petition signed by over 30,000 people, including Stephen Hawking, the British government issued a formal apology. Prime Minister Gordon Brown said, "We're sorry. You deserved so much better." In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted him a posthumous royal pardon, only the fourth in British history. In 2021, his face was printed on the new £50 banknote, alongside diagrams of the bomb and quotes from his 1936 paper. The Bank of England called him a war hero, a pioneer of computer science, and a symbol of the values we hold dear. And in 2022, the UK passed Turing's Law, pardoning thousands of men convicted under historic anti-gay laws. Yet none of this brought him back. What remains is the question: was his death a surrender or a final act of control? In a world that denied him the right to live as himself, he chose the manner of his exit, not with rage, not with violence, but with quiet, methodical precision, the same precision he used to break Enigma. The apple was not just a symbol of death, it was a symbol of knowledge, of forbidden truth, of the cost of seeing what others refuse to see. Today, every time you type a password, use GPS, or ask a voice assistant a question, you are using a world shaped by Turing's mind. The digital age is his legacy, but his humanity, his love, his pain, his courage is his truth. And in the end, that truth is more powerful than any machine. For 55 years after his death, Alan Turing existed in silence. His name was absent from war memorials, omitted from computing textbooks, and erased from the story of victory in World War II. He was a ghost in the archives, mentioned only in footnotes, if at all. The man who had shortened the war by years and saved millions of lives was remembered, if remembered at all, as a footnote to a footnote. But silence cannot kill a frequency. And Turing's mind had broadcast a signal too strong to fade. The first echo came in the 1970s, when the veil over Bletchley Park began to lift. Historians like F.H. Hinsley revealed the truth. Ultra-intelligence had been decisive. Turing's name surfaced in declassified documents. In 1983, the BBC aired Breaking the Code, a powerful drama starring Garrett Jacobi as Turing. For the first time, the public saw not just the genius, but the man, the loneliness, the love, the injustice. Still, the British government remained silent. Then, in 2009, something changed. A computer scientist named John Graham Cumming launched an online petition on the UK government website, Grant Alan Turing a Pardon. It spread like wildfire. Scientists, actors, politicians, and ordinary citizens signed over 30,000 in days. Stephen Hawking wrote, "He deserves recognition for his contribution to the war effort and to science." On September 10, 2009, Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a formal apology. "We're sorry. You deserve so much better." It was not a pardon, but it was a beginning. The movement grew. In 2012, on the centenary of Turing's birth, events were held worldwide. Google honored him with a live-action Enigma doodle. The Royal Mail issued a stamp. A statue in Sackville Park, Manchester, where Turing often walked, became a pilgrimage site. But justice remained incomplete. Pardons in the UK are rare and typically reserved for those proven innocent. Turing had not been innocent. He had been guilty of loving a man in a country that called it a crime. Then, in 2013, justice arrived in the form of a royal decree. On Christmas Eve, Queen Elizabeth II granted Alan Turing a posthumous royal pardon only, the fourth in British history. The law was clear. His conviction was unjust and discriminatory. The pardon was not just for him, but for what he represented. Yet activists argued one pardon was not enough. Thousands of men had been convicted under the same law. In 2017, the UK passed Turing's Law, an amendment that automatically pardoned over 50,000 deceased men and allowed living survivors to apply for pardon. It was a historic reckoning with a dark chapter of British history. But the final tribute came in 2021. On June 23, Turing's birthday, the Bank of England unveiled the new £50 banknote. There, in elegant detail, was Alan Turing's portrait. Beside him, a table from his 1936 paper, a blueprint of the bomb, and a quote, "This is only a foretaste of what is to come." It was more than currency. It was national atonement. It was immortality. Today, Turing's legacy lives not in statues, but in every line of code, every encrypted message, every AI that learns. The Turing test remains the benchmark for artificial intelligence. The Turing Award is computing's Nobel Prize. Google, Apple, and Microsoft all cite him as foundational. And in the streets, his story fuels progress. At Pride marches, his name is chanted. In classrooms, his life is taught not as a tragedy, but as a call to protect difference. Genius, his story reminds us, often wears the face of the outsider. Yet the greatest tribute is the world he made possible. A world where a machine can translate languages, diagnose diseases, connect strangers across oceans, and even compose music. All because one man asked, "Can machines think?" and then showed us how to build one that could. He was persecuted for loving the wrong way, but he loved the right things: truth, logic, beauty, and patterns, and the stubborn belief that reason could save us. In the end, it did. Alan Turing did not just break Enigma. He broke the silence around shame. He broke the myth that heroes must be perfect. He broke the code of a society that feared difference. And though he died alone, he is no longer forgotten. Because every time you type a password, send a secure message, or ask your phone a question, you are speaking his language, the language of logic, of courage, of love that refused to hide. And that language, like his mind, is eternal.